favorite composer is Johann Sebastian Bach. If there's one single work which most amazes me, it's a piece for unaccompanied violin. It's the last movement of the second partita. It's called the Chaconne, and it is the richest, most complex, subtlest piece I know. I mean, a big Mahler symphony with hundreds of people, blasting away, that's trivial. But this Chaconne is just absolutely wonderful. And I would aspire to immodestly think of my complex life with many things going, but somehow fitting together in my mind as somehow analogous to this Chaconne.
"60 years ago, Harry Markowitz spawned a revolution in the world of finance, a revolution that subsequently became known as modern portfolio theory. The seeds for this were sown in his seminal 1952 paper, Portfolio Selection, in which he recognized that the risk of a portfolio is less defined by the riskiness of the individual assets than by their covariance, their correlations. You can have two stocks that are each very high risk. Put the two of them together, and if the correlations are low enough, the combination can be surprisingly low risk. This work was formalized and transformed into what's now known as an efficient frontier. Every point on that efficient frontier maximizes our expected return on the portfolio for each unit of expected risk. This formed the basis for his 1959 book, which expanded on the original 1952 paper and became the basic essence of modern portfolio theory.
What I did in 1952 was propose mean and standard deviation or variance as criteria for portfolio selection. Mm-hmm. And I showed the relationship between the expected returns of individual securities and that of a portfolio, and the relationship between the variances and the correlations of the individual securities and the variance of the portfolio. I was proposing it both as a positive theory about how investors do act and advice as how they should act. Mm-hmm. By 1959, there is no mention of this as a hypothesis about how people do act. It isn't because I forgot that one should also have positive theories as well as normative theories, but I no longer, like the SEC, to paraphrase the SEC, I no longer either approved or disapproved the hypothesis that people do act this way, but it was still normative. The most articulate writer, hands down, in our field.
Peter Bernstein.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Peter Bernstein, said, you don't know what it was like to build institutional portfolios before 1950. And he describes a haphazard process where people would have, they'd sit around the board and, I got a report and this is that and I know this. And he said, now you have a process.
Yes.
And that moment was one of these things where you feel a chill run up your spine. I understood what I had started.
I first came upon Harry's work, and of course Harry's name, when I was studying portfolio theory, and I think this must have been junior year at Caltech. And of course, this is lesson 1 or 2 in portfolio theory, where we learn about mean variance optimization and how to construct an efficient frontier, and how to interpret the various points on the efficient frontier. And so, Harry Markowitz and his work on minimum variance portfolio is almost synonymous with sort of finance. That's the first thing you learn, that's the first thing you master. So he was really the first one that made it very, very clear that you should not look at investments as a very simple collection of stocks, and that you should have good performance from each of the stocks in order to have a well-performing portfolio.
Well, of course, I heard about his work early in my career. In fact, the first place I ever worked, the Boston company, I built the optimizer that they used, and I built it on a foundation of Harry's work and ultimately licensed Andre Perol's version of it because we were developing multi-factor models. He's had a huge influence on me, partly because he's shown how fun innovation can be and how easy it is to make a difference with innovation, and partly because he's a genuinely nice person.
You enter into a relationship with Harry from, first of all, a place of, pure awestruck, right? It's someone with a Nobel Prize. You don't run into many Nobel Prize winners. And you're going to be a little intimidated because you don't want to say anything that's too stupid. Harry is like, any other true scientist. He's interested in having a thoughtful conversation. He's interested in having a debate.
Around the age of 14, I read Darwin's Origin of Species and was just tremendously impressed by the way he would systematically marshal his evidence and so on. And then I began reading science, not the biological sciences, but astronomy was especially interesting to me, and physics. And then the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle and Descartes, and especially Hume. Hume argued that despite the fact that I pick up this cup and I won't pick up the cup and drop it, but take this ball and release it and it goes down the last 100 times, I have no proof positive that it's going to go down the next time. Or to put it another way, even though Sir Isaac Newton's universal theory of gravity had been confirmed thousands of times, that was no proof that there wouldn't come a phenomena which would no longer fit his model. So when I went into University of Chicago, when I applied, they said, we usually don't take people this far down in your high school class, but I had told them how I had read philosophy and so on. They said, but we'll let you take the entrance exam. So not only did the entrance exam allow me in, but they did surveys, physical science, biological science, humanities, social science, and so on. They said, well, you've learned enough on your own, you've learned enough about the physical sciences so you don't have to take the survey course. So when 2 years later I had to choose a department, I forgot how much I loved the physical sciences, especially astronomy. In the social science survey course, there was a course in economics, and I had enjoyed economics, so I went into economics. And within economics, I soon gravitated to the theory of rational decision making under uncertainty, or economics of uncertainty. And so this is the path by which I got to where I am.
Harry, in the last 60 years, do you think markets have become more informationally efficient?
It depends on your definition of information. It may also depend on your definition of efficient. There's certainly a lot more data running around, more data produced, transmitted faster than there was in 1952. I was at the Coles Commission at Yale at the invitation of Jim Tobin, and I wanted to produce, and eventually did produce, a 9-security plus cash numerical example of an efficient frontier, using historical data, of course, so you didn't have to make it up. And the way we got this historical data is the Coles Foundation hired, I guess, a student to go to the library to get the past copies of the Wall Street Journal, and he got the stock pages, the report of the the closing prices on AT&T and U.S. Steel and so on, 9 securities. Borden, I remember, did very well. He copied them in hand, punched them got them into a punch cards, and finally, using a card reader calculator machine, I computed these returns. Now, okay, I don't know, it's probably already true that you just ask a database and it comes out of the clouds and, God sends it from heaven. So there is a lot more data. But let's distinguish between data and the truth, information. Information is things that are true. This one number, is a hypothesis. And the whole Wall Street Journal is filled with hypotheses. So, yes, there is more data coming faster. Information, who knows? Now, you spoke about efficiency. I wrote a paper called Market Efficiency, a Fine Distinction, and So What? The distinction is between the statement, the market is efficient in that it's got perfect information, probabilistic, of course, and everybody has the correct beliefs and it's working, you may be doing mean variance on it. That's one statement. Another statement, which is quite different, is the market portfolio is a mean variance efficient portfolio. So people have the impression, because their textbooks, who should be educating them rather than misinforming them. Bill Sharp says that if everybody believed in mean variance and did like Markowitz says in 1952 and 1959, then the market portfolio would be an efficient portfolio and there would be a linear relationship. Then expected returns would be proportional to betas. Well, he made another assumption. He also assumed that everybody in this room, in fact, everybody in the world that wants to invest, can borrow all they want at the risk-free rate. And turns out I can't. I don't know about you, but I can't. You cannot borrow all you want at the risk-free rate or short and use the proceeds without limit. Then it is not true that the market portfolio is an efficient portfolio in the CAP-M sense. There is not a linear relationship between expected return and beta, thus defined. So all these people who are trying to see whether the market is efficient by seeing if there is a linear relationship, and some say there is and some say there isn't. If it turns out that that isn't out where the is, and they have all these wild explanations of why, I have an alternate hypothesis. Since I cannot borrow all I want at the risk-free rate, the assumption of CAP-M is not true, and that's why there isn't a linear relationship. So much more for market efficiency. If I could be any person at any moment of time, I would be James Clerk Maxwell, who, from Faraday's work, knew that moving magnetism caused electricity, and flowing electricity induced magnetism, which causes electricity, which causes magnetism, and this would propagate as a wave, and from purely electrical and magnetic considerations, he could figure out the speed at which this wave propagated, and he does the calculation, and the speed at which an electromagnetic wave propagates is the same as the speed of light.
Yes.
And suddenly, God shone light on man at that moment.
Yeah.
That was even better than having Peter Bernstein say, now you have a process.